Good morning and welcome Commissioner Seggos, DEC staff, ESF students, faculty, and staff. I would also like to welcome Dareth Glantz, Region 7's new director. My name is Casey Duffy, Associate Director of Career Services here at ESF, and it is wonderful to be with you all today to kick off DEC at ESF Day. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge where we stand, that we have the privilege of meeting today in the ancestral lands of the Onondaga Nation, the center of the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee-Iroquois Confederacy, who we honor for their many contributions, including the original philosophy and practice of environmental stewardship. The relationship between ESF and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is a long-standing and important one, with both entities working directly towards improving our world. ESF educates and trains environmental leaders, and the DEC provides a multitude of career pathways for our graduates to pursue their passion for the environment. This collaborative effort not only nurtures the next generation of environmental stewards, but also strengthens New York State's commitment to a greener and more resilient future. The overwhelming number of ESF graduates who have and currently work at the DEC is proof of this. I know many of them are here today as part of this event, and we are excited to welcome them back to campus. I must give a major thank you and shout out to ESF alumni and DEC environmental engineer Christine Ellsworth. Her commitment to both the DEC and ESF have been integral to making this event possible. Our partnership with the DEC is multifaceted and continually growing. It is very exciting to host the DEC on our campus and expose to our students the variety of divisions and regions that exist within the DEC and the careers available to them. Today, we will offer many opportunities to engage and learn more. The DEC has moved forward numerous key environmental initiatives under the dedicated leadership of Commissioner Seggos, who has been overseeing this agency for the past 8 years. Commissioner Seggos was instrumental in the passage of the state's nation-leading climate change law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and now serves as the co-chair of its implementing body, the Climate Action Council. Commissioner Seggos also devised and is responsible for the $2.5 billion Clean Water Infrastructure Act and spearheaded the reauthorization of the state's Superfund law and reforms of the Brownfield Tax Credit Program. As co-chair of the state's Drinking Water Quality Council, he oversaw the establishment of the most protective water quality standards for PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane. Unfortunately, President Mahoney had an unexpected circumstance arise and is unable to be with us here today. Matthew Millay, Executive Director for Strategic Initiatives and a proud alum of working for the DEC in 2000 and 2001, will be representing President Mahoney today. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Millay right now.
Well, thank you, Casey. This is exciting, and let's hear it for Casey, who worked really hard. Our first DEC day. To our faculty, staff, and students that are here, welcome, and most important, I'd like to recognize our Provost and Executive Vice President, Sam Mucosta, is also here. Thank you, Sam, for being here. And Basil, we go back, and I'm so happy. I'm not happy that Joni's not here, but I'm happy that she said, Matt, can you do this for me? I said, of course I can do this for you. I'm excited to do this for you. And she sends her apologies and her regrets to all of you that she can't be here, but any chance I get to have coffee with Basil is a good day for me.
And friends.
And friends. So welcome, everyone, and we're going to have a great talk with our commissioner and my friend Basil, who I'm just so proud to have had the opportunity to work with, to know, and to recognize a lot of what you just heard from Casey is a remarkable tenure in state government, but also a remarkable journey to get there. And that's how I'd like to start off our conversation with the commissioner. For those of you that are in your studies or in graduate school, is what I would ask you, commissioners, why don't we start off with, were you ever at a session like this, whether it was undergrad or law school, where you saw a panel and you're like, that's what I want to do? And if you could talk a little bit about that journey and what brought you to state government.
Matt, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks to all of you for being here today. Let's see, how did I get here? I think it was like freshman year math class where I realized I wanted to be commissioner of DEC. I don't think I took many math classes, and it shows. You know, I always loved the outdoors, even from being a little kid, and wanted to find a way to channel that interest into something. And I think sort of the older I got into college, the more interest I started getting into policy as well. So there was a natural nexus. But honestly, it was always, there's always sort of one thing that changes your view. And I had a professor, it was actually first year in the spring, biogeography professor in college, who just changed my view. There was this series of lectures on the buffalo and the demise of the buffalo, demise of Native American people in the West, and sort of that discussion that we had in this class about that change in nature, but also in humanity, and the impact of colonization at the time and the westward movement. It just kind of got me thinking differently about what I wanted to do. It wasn't going to be necessarily a biology pursuit or a natural sciences. I wanted to get more into the sort of the human element of my work, and ultimately that turned into a couple of cool internships during college. On the heels of being a dump truck driver, a house painter, landscaper, a ranch hand, sort of getting real experiences in the field. But I got a great internship at Natural Resources Defense Council in New York City. Did urban environmental work for a summer, and then crawled back on my hands and knees after college, asking for a job. I think I got the bug for solving problems, sort of societal issues that were environmental in nature. And I think that was the mid to late 90s. That was a really long time ago. And I haven't been certainly at DEC that long, but I feel like in a way I landed in a job here that is truly special. It really gives me and all of us at DEC, all the alumni here in the room, a chance to really impact the world every day. And
so we'll get a chance to talk about, let's not skip too far ahead.
Yeah.
First, though, so NRDC, I think, is an important starting point, is because many of our students, and when we talk about this, and I know Sam is a huge champion of this, as is our chancellor, is that every student in the SUNY system is now really encouraged, and ultimately I think the chancellor will put in place, will have an internship by the time they graduate. Mm-hmm. So clearly that had an impact on you, but I think it's interesting because so many people probably did start their careers, they either go right to DEC or they start with an organization like an NRDC. Yeah. So how did that frame your perspective working in the not-for-profit kind of advocacy community to start your journey?
Well, I think at the time it was the best option, right? Really coming out of college, I didn't think much about going right into government, but I thought certainly about advocacy at the time. I mean, the environmental movement was well underway, but there were some groups that were way ahead of the game, talking at a much higher level than I think I could have expected to jump into at least coming out of college. I mean, there weren't a lot of jobs back then in the environmental community, in the environmental world, not like today. Certainly weren't a lot of environmental business jobs. Yes, there were traditional ones in waste management or early solar or other types of energy jobs. But there really weren't a lot of jobs. But the environmental movement was really starting to get rolling at the time.
And NRDC, remind me, help me with the history here. They came out. They're big now, but at the time, was it Storm King was a big?
Yeah, that was.
Could you give some context to their kind of, because you were probably there as they were just growing and.
Well, Storm King was
really,
1968.
I've
been around.
Not that long, but still in the 90s, John Adams and just a huge.
John was still rolling at the time.
But
they had gotten NRDC founded in 1970, sort of right at the tail end of the beginning of the environmental movement. That was 1960s and what that led to, and nationally. So they grew from this kind of small legal shop in 1970 into, even when I was there, organization of about 250 people around the country, and they had a couple of offices around the world. So I got into the urban program, which was, I wanted to stay in New York, and they had a huge program protecting the watershed down in New York City, as well as some early environmental justice work in the city as well, solid waste issues, energy issues. and real quality of life issues. John, that was really John's idea. John Adams, founder of NRDC, really one of the grandfathers of the environmental movement in the States here. Created this program, I jumped into it, and proved to be a really good proving ground at the time. But there really weren't other big jobs. John was doing stuff at the local level in Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, but he was regularly talking to the President Clinton, and was that arc of effectiveness from the grassroots all the way up to the highest office in the country was something that really interested me. Is it in a way he was grounded, NRDC was grounded locally, but was really effective at a high level on these global issues. That was like time like the Kyoto Protocol and some of these other global initiatives, the early efforts to curb climate change, which basically went flat. They weren't ready at the time. We were ready, but the world wasn't at the time. But John was playing in that realm, so it really was a great first job. And when I say first job and my hands and knees, and this is maybe some advice to all of you, just be ready to do anything. Get your foot in the door. Get your foot in the door. I literally just got my foot in the door, and I said, I'll do anything you want. So at the time, there was a research program called LexisNexis. It's like the early Google for research, and if any of you remember that, it was a pain to use. And NRDC had this sweet deal. They could get half off LexisNexis if they used it between 3 in the morning and 7 in the morning. So who do you think showed up at NRDC at 3 in the morning every day? That was me. So I did research from 3 to 7 in the morning, and then had my coffee finally. Everyone started rolling in, and I would go do research for foundations and fundraising, and that turned into a few other jobs and ultimately into this other job. So really just be willing to do whatever's needed to get the job done. And that's, I think, where you find the opportunity. You jump into it with enthusiasm, bring your skills. You all are way ahead of wherever I was at the time. But you'll bring that into that job. But just be hungry and just cut the wood that's in front of you. Yeah.
And it's a great point you raised about John being, and you worked with John.
I worked, not right off the bat, not during the LexisNexis research
but
phase.
You made your way at his, but track that team that you see there, because the people that are there have these amazing stories. And John Adams clearly had an amazing story, and he really is one of the founding fathers of the environmental movement that leads to so much of what we do here and so many of these other organizations. Then came Riverkeeper.
Yeah.
Right? And you ended up at Riverkeeper ultimately.
Right. Went to law school, went to Pace Law, really great environmental program. Got my legal training there, and then went right from there into Riverkeeper on the Hudson. Another really good group at the time. Was pretty good size, about 25 of us, mostly legal and big cases all over the place.
Started in the Hudson Valley, but then
Started
now
in Hudson
it's
Valley.
national.
Now it's national, international. Now there's Riverkeepers all over the world. So that was a good place right out of law school. Yeah,
It's a good start.
it's a pretty good start.
John Adams, Bobby Kennedy.
Well, at least one of the two of them is still doing pretty well.
Right. So let's transition. So you're invited to join an administration in as Deputy Secretary for Environment. It's a great role. Tell us about the transition into policy advocacy or legal challenges to things that you may or may not that you disagree with that are happening, to jumping into the other side of it, of negotiating legislation and advocating for policy and writing State of the States and really playing a key role in a pretty active organization.
Well, I think honestly, I had a bit of an assist there. It was a brief period, 3 years, between Riverkeeper and getting into government, where I worked in business. So I actually worked in private sector. It was like a family fund in a way. It wasn't a private equity, but it was a fund where this very dedicated family effectively was putting a ton of money into environmental causes. So recycling businesses, clean water technology, really cutting edge energy stuff. So I got to get in there and do business development for that. I'd met them when I was at Riverkeeper and carried that into this job. And that, in a way, was a good counterbalance to the advocacy that I'd been doing, sort of litigation and advocacy at Riverkeeper. You see how the rest of the world, kind of the business world operates, and that I think was a good intro into government as well. So get the nonprofit, get the for-profit, and then get into government. And so I think my transition into government was probably more effective because of that, because it wasn't just the advocacy lens on everything. It was, well, we really need our economy to be strong. I mean, we need to look for ways to bring environment and business together. Again, this is about 13 years ago. So 14 years ago, there was already an incredible amount of environmental business effort underway. Not like today, but today is something totally different. But there were real opportunities back then. So getting into government, at a pretty high level, being thrust into a job where, you have, I was at the time overseeing parks, state parks, Environmental Facilities Corporation, alumni of the EFC right here, Matt Millay, DEC, and then a bunch of other smaller organizations that state agencies. So, immediately you get this umbrella view of how the environment portfolio interacts with all the other portfolios around the state, so transportation, health, and everything else, and working for a principal that wanted to be a leader on all of those issues. So, we worked together. Matt and I were both on the second floor. That's what they call the governor's office in the building in Albany. First floor is budget. Second floor is governor. Third floor or fourth floor are legislature. I think there's a fifth floor. I think that's where you go when you're really in trouble. Dunkin' Donuts is on the first floor too. Yeah. Keeps you going. Keeps you running. Not at promo. I'm not paid by Dunkin's. But just jumping into a state like New York. I mean, New York is an incredible state. We are the 9th largest economy in the world. Russia, I think, had some problems in the last few years. So they dropped from 9
as they should
to where we are now. So we're not the biggest economy, and budget making, law making, doing environmental work, doing clean energy work in an economy our size. When everyone is watching New York, I think it makes these jobs so valuable. It makes every day that we're in these jobs so valuable, and particularly when you're in the governor's office and you have all that top-down view of everything.
And Casey alluded to some of the dollars, and we'll get into that. But before we get to the happy stuff, because there's a lot of really remarkable stuff I want to talk about. But I also watched you live through one of the hardest things that can happen in government is the unexpected and the unknown. We saw this historically, and hopefully some of you study this. Superfund. Superfund exists because of New York State and Love Canal. Everybody thought it was okay to do something, and then they figured out, no, it's not okay. I lived through this in the Pataki era with trichloroethylene, where everybody thought it was fine to have subsurface trichloroethylene in places like Endicott, where IBM used it to clean microchip boards for years and years and years. They said no big deal. And then someday, 20 years later, someone figured out, wait, it vaporizes, it goes into people's basements, and it's dangerous. And then we heard about this with these water contaminants, which I'll let Basil talk about a lot, which was they're fine until scientists, people that work after going to ESF, figure out, no, they're not fine. So just a few minutes on advocacy, private sector, working in the governor's office, and then something like Hoosick Falls hits.
Yeah. So I got the job in early November 2015, DEC, and by the end of November, the Hoosick Falls problem started, and I'm thinking to myself, what the hell did I get into here?
Give some context.
So Hoosick Falls, small town, village, 4,000 people in the Albany area, rural community, and all of a sudden the whole village loses its water supply because they'd been drinking water contaminated with PFAS, specifically this coating that was going into a metal production process at a local plant, which was the hometown employer, and discovered in the water supply, and all of a sudden DEC is put in the position of having to figure out how to address the contamination, work with the other agencies, federal and state, addressing contamination, and how do we get people water to live, 4,000 people. It's not just an apartment building, it was the entire village. So DEC, we have a forest ranger and an ECO in here as well in the back. Folks, raise your hands. Okay. So you probably know about what the rangers and ECOs do. Our ECOs are traditional, our game wardens, our rangers traditionally are the folks that are helping to put out fires, find lost hikers, protect the forest preserve. These folks became the biggest plumbers in New York. The fastest growing plumbing company in New York was the DEC Forest Ranger ECO remediation operation. We put in drinking water protections into 800 homes in a few weeks. We started rebuilding the village filtration plant very shortly. We got the company under consent order to do cleanup, basically turning this 4,000 person catastrophe into a positive. And it took an enormous amount of work to do that. Literally took the entire agency, which is why we had our rangers and ECOs helping us out. It took literally the entire agency. We had about 1,000 people that parachuted in to resolve the issue of a lost water supply. And it was sort of like one of those sucker punches that you have to get up from and ultimately find a path forward and restore the public's trust at the same time. This is about a year after Flint, Michigan, so there was a lot of focus on government inaction, government actions. What are the sort of the accountability issues, and also the knowledge that what's in our water supply now is a major question, apolitical for all Americans.
It's a great point on apolitical, and it's a great lesson in there not being a playbook, though. There was no playbook for that at the time, and the science. And this is where we come in as scholars here, and as our faculty and their research, as well as what we're training our students to go and do, is you don't have to accept things the way they are just because of the way that this changed the paradigm on a lot of drinking water issues in the United States. And it's continued to evolve from here. But at the time that this started, I think the authorized level under drinking water standards was 400 parts per billion.
It was 400 parts per billion, and it dropped down to 100.
Dropped down to 100, but now it's at 4?
It's at 10.
At 10. So not so long ago, science was saying, and the implementers of that science were saying 400 parts per billion is okay, no problem. And they've reduced it then. The science tells us much differently now that it's at 10.
And I think it's important to see the Hoosick Falls issue in the context of what's happened over the last 8 years since that broke. Drinking water in a village, we resolved the issue of the drinking water, but we used the crisis to address a much larger problem. Matt talked about the drinking water, the standards that we set. We set lower standards to protect people in New York, which helped to lead other states to do the same thing. We had almost no grant money to give out to fix problems in communities that had either drinking water issues or wastewater issues. We had a very robust lending program where we could loan a bunch of money. We didn't have grants to fix problems. So we learned with this that we need a lot more money. So this issue in Hoosick Falls actually led to what was then the $2.5 billion Clean Water Infrastructure Act is now $5 billion. It also, I think, led to the Bond Act passing, $4.2 billion for environmental spending. So these kinds of things where you have the awareness that you've got to fix a problem locally, and that it's in fact much bigger than that, looking for ways to work with the legislature, work with the communities, work with the voters and the budget makers to get the resources you need. So we turned something that was very scary in government, very scary for communities, into a big positive.
This is the good news part I alluded to, and Basil was a huge advocate. He started the funding for the clean water resources prior to going to DEC, and then getting to $5 billion. Just to give some context, though, in 1987, the federal government stopped giving grants for water infrastructure in the United States of America. Completely. The federal government said, we're out of the water business. And that led to a lot of disinvestment over many, many years, and New York State really stepped up Started with Governor Cuomo and really Basil's leadership at DEC, but $5 billion is more than the federal government invests, maybe not including IRA and some of the legislation that has recently passed, but up to recent legislation, $5 billion was at a scale of probably 5 times what the federal government was investing in water infrastructure. So you've had a great, because you serve on the EFC Board of Directors, you're also managing a lot of the pool at DEC. The Bond Act, $4 billion, is 4 times larger than the previous Environmental Bond Act, which was passed in 1996. So it had been a long time since New York had adopted an Environmental Bond Act, and to see one of this scale. So if you could talk a little bit about your listening tour, how's that's going, and also where you see these water resources. I mean, it's really, truly historic and remarkable investment in New York State that's happening now, and you've been there for the whole show. So give us some color.
Sure, and I'll just say this right off the bat, that we've worked really hard to make the connection between a clean environment and a healthy economy. And those two things together, that's basically underpinned everything that we've done since I started at DEC. And that's a very easy argument to make when you can show the people that, if you're not making the investments in your water supply and protecting your water supply, you're losing your water supply. And it's not just human health, it's the entire economy of a village or a town or a county or a state can suffer, and you see that around the world. You see disinvestment and how that actually harms the bottom line of a jurisdiction, of state, nation, whatever the case may be. So that enabled us to go to the next level on this, right? Go get that $5 billion where it didn't exist before. No other state has that. No other state has a $1 billion loan program that Matt was helping to run. And certainly no other state has the amount of money that's going in, grant money that's going in to environmental spending. It just had spent a few days out in Boulder, Colorado with fellow commissioners from the other 50 states talking about.
They must be envious of you.
Well, it's funny.
They must say, Basil, how do you do it, man?
They are envious of us. I mean, we clearly are. New York and California are really the heavyweights in these meetings, and I think you have these collections of commissioners that come together, and it's a lot of the smaller states looking for help from one another. What New York has, what California has, and to some degree a few of the other states in between, is enormous public support behind environmental spending. And that's what led to the Bond Act. So we did a tour this summer on the heels of the voters saying yes to a $4 billion Bond Act. The biggest Bond Act ever in state history. And the biggest ballot measure to pass nationally last year. So lots of really exciting momentum behind the Bond Act right now, what it can do for New York State. We just took the road show around New York this summer and talked to New Yorkers all over the state, 10 meetings, huge turnout. We've a couple thousand people turn out to the Bond Act road show, talking with them just about this opportunity. And, what are we going to do? What is the state going to do with $4.2 billion? We want to make it very much of a bottoms-up initiative. So we're actually soliciting ideas from New Yorkers all across the state. Give us your best ideas on how this money can be spent. Now, there are buckets of the Bond Act. Bond Act will fund everything from, electric school buses to flood controls and fish hatcheries. But really the core focus of it is give us your best ideas so we can protect the state, so we can put the state at a competitive advantage over where it would have been otherwise. We expect, without any action, we're likely to experience like $50 to $70 billion of storm damage in New York State over the next decade. 50 to 70 billion. And you look around the world at what's happening this summer. I think you're probably here at ESF for a reason, right? You're here because you care. And you want to learn, you want to be part of the solution. So if you're watching the press and you're watching what's going on around the world, it is truly devastating. And I know there's reason for optimism. There's also reason for realism. Like, you have to see what is going on. When you lose potentially 20,000 people in a flood in Libya, that new lakes are being created in Greece, years worth of rain in several hours. The Canadian wildfires. I mean, there are reasons for the work that we're doing right now. It's happening a lot faster, and it's more devastating, I think, than we ever could have experienced or expected. but to now have tools here, the kinds of tools in New York to fix these problems in advance, to get ahead of where we would be otherwise. It says a lot about where New Yorkers are, that 70% of New Yorkers said, yes, this makes sense to spend this money. It makes sense to spend $400 million a year through the Environmental Protection Fund. It makes sense to have really stringent laws, the nation's leading climate law here in New York. All of this makes sense, I think, because the state has come around to the fact that environmental investment is vital, and we're seeing what's happening around the world, and we have put a value on being a leader on this. So to be in this job now, to have the opportunity to help lead that is amazing, and we've had amazing principles on this. Governor Cuomo was very strong on the environment. Governor Hochul, honestly, even stronger. And she's given us resources that we never could have expected through now the Bond Act and extraordinary commitments in staffing. The biggest, this is for you, biggest staff increase at DEC since
A long time.
the late 2000s, if not before.
A long time.
So there's more opportunity there.
Well, you used the word optimism. That reminds me of our commencement speaker, Anne-Therese Gennari, who's a self-described climate optimist, and she talked to our graduating class about exactly what you're alluding to there. How do you keep your team focused? How do you keep them optimistic? And as you were just saying, how do we talk to our students about, I mean, this week is it's a challenge to stay optimistic. It's a challenge to say that we're not overwhelmed with this, but the message from Anne-Therese, and as you just started to get to, is there are things to be grateful for and happy about. And as a leader of a big team, and as a leader in the cabinet too, Basil is the longest serving cabinet member, the dean of the governor's cabinet. How do you keep that energy flowing? And what's your advice to our students on staying optimistic as they pursue their studies?
I was a lot taller when I started this job years ago.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is honestly morale as opposed to optimism. I mean, I am an optimistic person by nature. I think if you're in these jobs, you really have to be optimistic. But I think it's, you have to be real about it and not be blindly optimistic. So I think there's an element of what I try to get across in my agency is keeping morale up, because the sky is falling in a lot of ways, but we have high morale because we have tools. We've got really strong laws and really strong regulations and lots of really important financial resources to put to bear on the problem solving. So keeping morale high, now my staff here may say otherwise, but keeping morale high I think is super important, because you're making that connection between your tools you have and the really dire problems you're trying to solve, and it's not a constant, right? You have dips in morale when things get tough. You've got boost in morale when things are better and we get stuff done. But I think keeping an eye on staff morale is super important to me. I think it is good to be optimistic. I mean, I think it is good to have try to put on the rosy colored lenses when you approach this stuff, as just rattling off just the crises that are happening all around the world. And I mean, crises have always happened, right? Things feel worse now. In some ways they are, I think, because things are moving faster and faster. We're starting to lose control a little bit. But things are always difficult, and I think in leadership you want to project an air of confidence that you can fix problems and bring people along, give them the tools to tap into their expertise to solve problems. And I think that there is a reason for optimism, but you look at the global scale. We can do a lot in New York here. We roll into the summit of other commissioners out in Colorado. It's clear that we're doing a lot.
I feel good, right?
And then we went to the climate summit in Scotland a couple of years ago, and didn't expect for the states to have much recognition in this global body, but it was clear that the states were doing most of the work. The states and counties and subregions and cities we're doing most of the work on climate action around the world, far more so than at the federal level. Now, of course, you've got lots of stuff going on thanks to President Biden, but there's reason for optimism because there's so much leadership at the state level, and you're seeing that, and we're seeing it from New York. That said, this is a global problem that we're facing, and there is a lot of pain being felt out there right now. Poverty levels, right? Yes, we're doing better globally on increasing the average life expectancy. We're doing better on a number of really important social indicators. But we're facing challenges that are becoming uncontrollable. So I think I'm an optimist on climate, but I'm a realist that this is really, really hard work. Just getting our climate law done in New York was very hard. It took years to get the law passed. Then it took 2.5 years for us to create a plan. Now we're putting the plan into motion in the context of post-COVID, inflation, supply chain issues, other labor issues, and of course the polarization issue, right? All of that happening at the same time when we need to be operating at full speed. So there are some real challenges, real headwinds. This will be the hardest thing that we ever do as a society. You could think about any social issue. All of them extremely important. But if this planet is unsustainable, if we can't survive on the planet, and that's the shelter over your head, that's the food in your belly, right? If the planet can't survive, or if we can't survive on the changing planet, obviously, you know where that leads. So it makes this the most challenging thing we'll ever do, and makes every little component of that almost the most challenging you could possibly imagine.
And I think this is a great point on why our relationship with DEC. Basil serves on our board of trustees and has a designee serve. And as we're teaching, as we're researching, we have to be realistic. We can be optimistic. We have to keep our morale high, but they are big challenges.
Yeah.
But it's exciting to see New York State take such a leadership role, have the right leadership in place.
Let me tell you why I'm really optimistic, Matt. Honestly, it's because of the youth today. For real.
We see them here every day, which is why we love coming to work.
You see it here every day. It was the exception when I was a kid that you were environmentally focused. Now I think, I saw even yesterday on CNN as I was working, or MSNBC or whatever, that young Republican voters between the age of 18 and 34 are now majority supporting climate action. That's a huge change. Just that data point is a really, really encouraging thing. So if you take the entire population and you look at the demand for action, I mean, our state's climate law was driven largely by youth. The development of it, the passage of it, the energy behind it, driven by youth. So if there's a reason for optimism, it's because the younger generations are coming up and demanding it. They're seeing it. They're calling bullshit, right, when they need to, be it climate action or anything else. And they're taking the reins. And I think that's going to be what saves us all, is giving young kids, college-aged adults, the chance to take those reins and then become the leaders of the future. And I think that's much different from when I was in high school and college.
And if you get a chance, read up on the Climate Leadership Community Protection App, CLCPA. It's got a nice ring to it. Last question from me, and then we'll have the audience chime in. How are we doing on time, Casey? Are we good? Is service, the idea of service. Not only is he the dean of the cabinet, the longest-serving commissioner, in charge of 3,000 wonderful people and a huge portfolio, you're also in the Guard. You still in the Guard? Retired. But also, I follow his social media, which is fantastic. I encourage you to follow him on X or Twitter or whatever it's called now. But you volunteered a few times now to go to Ukraine and deliver ambulances, I think, correct? And that's just, in addition to being a great dad, being a great commissioner, being a great partner to Governor Hochul, you make time for that. That's a big commitment. Why don't you tell our team here about that journey, because that's been remarkable for me to watch too, just as a friend, and being like, this guy's amazing. What he does is amazing, and that is an amazing part of your story.
Thanks, Matt. I just, when the war started, I just couldn't sit on the sidelines. I just watched what happened. I think like all of us, perhaps not everybody, of course, but most people seeing what was going on. A big bully coming in and beating up a Democratic ally of ours. And I just had trouble sitting on the sidelines with it, so I was looking for ways to help and applying whatever skills I had, knowledge, friendships, allies that I had out there, into bringing some resources across. And then the opportunity came to actually go over there and be part of a crew driving ambulances around. That was last September, the first time I went over. Went into the country from Slovakia. We drove a convoy of about 25 ambulances into the country, into Kyiv, and working directly with the Territorial Defense Force, Ministry of Health. A few days after I got to Kyiv, we were all the way to the east, right at the front, delivered a bunch of ambulances and a few thousand first aid kits to the soldiers who we were about a mile from the Russian border, in an area that had just been liberated. Very eye-opening, to say the least. Saw the sort of the best in humanity. This country that had come together. That feeling, if any of you remember 9/11, that feeling in the U.S. here, of the spirit of unity that lasted a while here in the States, was pervasive. It was everywhere in that country. So the best in humanity with the worst of it, villages just completely destroyed, factories, hundreds of thousands of vehicles trashed. The devastation is like something you couldn't possibly imagine until you see it firsthand. Yes, the media, I think the access, social media is helpful on that, on getting the word across about it, but just seeing it firsthand and seeing the people that had been left behind. Went into Bucha, this one town. I've made close friends with the leadership there. That was the town that had been taken over, and horrible massacre had taken place there, and they were just getting back on their feet when I was with them. And then fast forward to March again, when we went back. We'd done about 150 ambulances total, medical supplies, first aid kits, tourniquets, working with orphanages, bringing in beds and desks and food into orphanages. There's millions of people displaced. And you go into these orphanages that, you see these rooms full of cribs with these babies who couldn't be more than a couple of months, totally unaware what the hell's going on around them, just breathing and eating, and it just gives you this sense of dread that this kind of thing could actually happen in 2022, 23. But I wanted to be a part of saying no and being part of the group of people that was providing help. So we got back there again, and we're fairly close to some of the fighting in Bakhmut when we were driving around, and I think the change in morale, right? Morale still very high, but very tired. Many months now into the war, and continuing to get more and more tired. But really, I think that dichotomy, the worst in humanity, that you could have people targeted by missile strikes and shells and terrorism in their villages and their beds, contrasted to the outpouring of love and support from the world to say no to this finally, to push back against this type of attack, gives me a lot of optimism.
There
right?
it is.
I mean, just to bring it back, I think it's you see the worst, but you see the best push back, and the best is this little kid in the schoolyard who punched the bully and stood up for himself, and there's others now supporting him. So, it's probably the best thing I've ever been a part of, other than my own family, my kids. I'm still very much a part of. Hopefully, be back there soon and bringing some more supplies and connections and help.
And I raised that in context. Yeah, really. each one of us can choose how we want to serve, and you've chosen that as a priority, and you've demonstrated such a commitment to that community, and it's been remarkable to watch. And I raise it because it's a great lesson. You can be really busy and just say, I'm really busy and I can't do it, or you can make it a priority, and you made that a priority for you. So I think it's another great lesson for our students, for our community, for myself personally, is that if you believe in something, make the time for it. Yep. And make that investment and show up. So I'll make one final plug and then turn it over for questions for our audience. You mentioned your Forest Rangers, and while I have you here, I'll just say thank you for your partnership. We hosted our first Forest Ranger Academy at our Ranger School in the history of DEC and ESF just this past year, and I was able to go to the graduation in Lake Placid, and it was just such a great group of professionals, and it was great to see the video of the training that they did at the Ranger School. They did training at the Oriskany facility that the state has, and then also at our Newcomb campus, and another demonstration of just the great connection between DEC and ESF, and I think we're working to continue that going, but I wanted to highlight that to our Rangers that are in the audience and to those that joined your ranks. I think it was the first class in a long time.
It was.
And what a great graduation that was to go to and to see you build those ranks up, because our Rangers, they become plumbers, but we also see on social media a lot of times the amazing work they do on rescues and just being out and protecting our natural resources all the time. So hopefully that was in the budget. I think it was in the budget.
Yep.
To do another school. So
yeah,
we're ready.
We're going to be doing schools for both our Rangers and our environmental conservation.
We're
police.
ready.
Yep.
So not a question, just a plug. Really. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask the commissioner?
We are hiring.
That,
thinking.
And that, let's note, that's why we're here today, really, is that this is fundamentally a career fair and an opportunity to say, build pathways,
We really are hiring. I mean, we have something like 600, I think 600, according to your stats, staff at DEC that are ESF alums. That's huge.
It's huge.
Huge number. And I think it's 300 alumni that identify as DEC as well. So your stats are a little funky, but it's 600. So there's huge pathways, and we're hiring. Our budget went through the roof this year. We added 215 staff for Bond Act, for climate work, and we really are having a hiring crunch. So if you're interested, please seek us out today.
And
take the civil service exam.
Take the exam, get in the system, and
Yep.
you don't know where it will take you. Just get started.
Yeah.
And find one thing about a job that interests you, and then find your mentors, find your leaders, and they will bring you on the path to a riverkeeper, to a private sector job, to the governor's office, to the commissioner's job. There was no playbook on how to do that.
No.
It happened because of commitment and hard work and focus, and the opportunities present themselves, and then you run into them. But you got to start, and DEC is such an exciting. I did work there for 2 years. It was a great place to be, such a great professional staff. But from 2000 until just recently, their ranks had not grown. We were just in a constant, New York State was in a constant hiring freeze, hiring pause, hiring no, whatever you want to call it. This is truly historic and remarkable, particularly for our graduates, to have this number of opportunities and this depth of opportunities. So really embrace what you have here today with all the people we're going to see out on the quad, and the commissioner's going to be here with his team. It really is a truly historic time with the resources and the jobs. It's a credit to you. It's a credit to Governor Hochul. Anybody have any questions while I'm gabbing away here? Brandon, we'll get you, and then over here. Let's do it.
So, Kevin, what is the DEC doing about all of the H5N1 outbreaks on bird farms in New York State? How is the DEC trying to prevent spillover?
All right, let me repeat that. So what is the DEC doing about the H5N1 outbreaks?
So our role is somewhat limited in this. We actually had the H5N1 hit our pheasant farm, unfortunately, this year. Devastated the farm. We complete loss of all of our birds. So that was traumatic, obviously, for the birds as well as our program. When it comes to larger H5N1, I mean, that's primarily Department of Health and Department of Ag and Markets focused issue. But we're obviously tracking that very closely. When it comes to hunting season, we put out lots of information about things to be aware of out in the field, whether it's H5N1 and bird flu issues, or if it's any of the health impacts that beset our deer or any of the other species. So we talk quite a bit about that, and ultimately, it's a concern as diseases come into the state, whether they're focused on poultry or other livestock, or if they are coming after the diseases are focused on human beings, like COVID. We're typically in the middle of all those responses. I mean, DEC was hugely active on the COVID response that the state had. We ran most of the drive-through testing facilities. We built and ran those. We built and ran most of the vaccine facilities as well. We were delivering food all across the state to people when they're effectively stuck in their homes. DEC is very much of an operational agency when it comes to public health. And, again, our ECOs, our rangers are doing a lot of that because they have this unique ability to run incident response, better than anybody. So they get called into situations that are atypical. So you learn here about wildlife, or you learn here about wildland fires. You get put into a mindset training-wise where you have the ability to step up when the state hits some hard times. And hopefully we don't have H5N1 at an extensive rate, but we're ready to respond if need be.
Great. Thank you for the question. In the back, and then Sam, I'll go to you.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
I'm Prajapati Sapkota from ESF. I graduated in December 22 with a PhD degree on environment and natural resources. My research topic was environmental citizenship of new Americans, basically two groups of refugee resettlement. I belong to the community. My question is, New York, especially in upstate New York, there are a large number of new Americans who have been granted settlement, and in the beginning they are facing, based on my research on environmental citizenship of Bhutanese refugees and Somali Bantus, I came to understand that in the beginning they face different aspects of the environment, like the physical environment, adaptation and integration, the social aspects, and the cultural aspects of the environment. And it takes time for them to integrate into the system. Are there any steps being taken by DEC to enhance the integration of these new Americans into the mainstream? And if there are some steps, what are they? And if there are some proposals, I'd be happy to know, and I'd be happy to work on such a proposal, because I also have thought about how we could integrate them by teaching them various aspects of the environment, especially the physical as well as the social aspects. I have done my PhD here, and I did my environmental engineering before that. So that's my background. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question, Doctor. So, we're thinking quite a bit about that. I mean, we have I think a strong record over the last decade, really, but in particular in the last several years on a couple of fronts. First, making our open spaces more accessible, breaking down traditional barriers to the outdoors, right? Everyone needs to get outside. We all experienced that during COVID. So making connections between urban communities and rural communities and outdoor opportunities. That's been a major focus of the agency, as well as state parks, right? State park system being a very accessible state park system nationally. So we're always encouraging people to get outside and providing multiple languages, breaking in the barriers on languages so that if there are questions that people have about adventuring outside in New York, they can call the language line and get access to that. So that's, I think, some of the outdoor, but some of the programmatic work that we're doing might even be more impactful. So the state's climate law is a good example of that. In fact, the state's climate law, the Bond Act, and our water spending all have as a focus the improvement of conditions in disadvantaged communities. In fact, if you're familiar with Justice 40 initiative at the federal level, that was based on what New York did here at the state level with our state's climate law, which is to put an emphasis on reducing pollution burdens in frontline communities. And those are often the communities that you reference where you have new Americans, where you have disadvantaged Americans, where you have traditional environmental justice communities. And making those communities, in fact, part of the solution, giving them a voice in how they are to chart a better future for public health and the environment within the community. So we did mapping, New York State, 2 years of mapping to identify where these communities were. We now have an unparalleled vision into disadvantaged communities based on 45 different indicators, so it's all science-based. And now, because of that, we have a very specific objective of spending that money at 35 to 40%. 35% minimum, 40% target of those investments will go into disadvantaged communities. So again, those are the standards in the law. They were the standards in the climate law. We put them into the Bond Act as well, and that means that as we go out and do spending, we're going to be soliciting input and leadership from those communities. So the Bond Act tour this summer, in fact, had that as one of its elements. We did the Bond Act tour in the North Country. We also were in Bronx, Brooklyn. We were in Long Island, Buffalo, and Cortland.
Cortland, not ESF.
Not
I'm still
ESF.
trying to figure that
Cortland.
one out, but that's
I know,
okay. We're
I
over
know.
it.
We're here too
over it.
much. We're here
We're
too
over
much.
it.
And by bringing those resources in with that specific target, we're looking for the communities to step up and give us those ideas. So part of that Bond Act tour was, in fact, to give us ideas on how to spend that money. And I would encourage you here in central New York or wherever you are to help get that message across, because ultimately, if we can use the $4.2 billion to, part of it at least, to increase the amount of park space in urban areas, to provide connections between communities to nature, to reduce pollution burdens in specific areas, then we can ultimately make the state a more welcoming place and a healthier place to live long term. We're also doing, I'll just throw this out there, the first of its kind in the world, statewide air monitoring initiative. We have partnered with a company called Aclima in 10 different communities around the state, covering 5 million people, driving cars around, Priuses, with these meters on the side that are taking constant readings of air pollution burdens. And that's giving us this literally lot by lot, not just block by block, but lot by lot view into air pollution here in New York State. Again, that goes right into what are people breathing, what are the laws, and how can we then use the funds that we have, the funds that we got originally from water, now for Bond Act, how can we use those funds to go and address those problems at the local level? So there's lots of opportunity for the public to get engaged in what we're doing through that process, through Bond Act feedback, and through just being stakeholders in the issues that we're working on. And for the New Americans, environmental justice communities, disadvantaged communities, rural, urban, anywhere around New York State, we're aiming to make this as much bottom up as it is top down, as it has been over the years.
Thank you, Doctor, for your question.
Thank you,
Congratulations on your PhD, and we'll have one last question from Dr. Bukasa. So this is it, Basil. You're off to. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner, for sharing your story. It's a remarkable example of what can be accomplished when you set goals. Absolutely fantastic. I appreciate the fact that the mandate of the DEC is to focus on things closer to home. But I'm reminded of a conversation we had with the Executive Cabinet earlier this week, where I pointed out that ESF is doing wonderfully on things to do with the environment and sustainability, but in the grand scheme of things, the US is 5% of the global population. So if we're going to be in the business of saving the world, saving the planet, we have to worry about the other 95%. Yeah. And my question is, what can the DEC do to spread the gospel, shall we say, on a global scale so that what we do will really matter to saving the planet?
Doctor, that's a great question. What can we do? I mean, if our budget was tripled, we could probably do a lot more around the world. But honestly, storytelling is really important. Leadership is really important. Local leadership is important. I think it's not just what can DEC do, it's what can New York State do. We have always led in New York State. New York State has always led on the biggest issues of the time. The environmental community stood up and said no to pollution back in the 1960s. Storm King case, right, which led to the modern environmental laws, and honestly probably saved the country's air and water over the time frame. How many thousands of lives saved? Women's rights, right? Suffrage, right here in New York. LGBTQ, Stonewall. Every major movement has started in New York. So I think what is really important is for us to tell the stories of what we're doing here in New York, and travel as much as we can to speak about it, create as many ambassadors who can go do that, create opportunities for youth in particular to come into this field. And if they work in New York at DEC, awesome. If they're going to work in China, awesome. You only have so many hours in the day to dedicate to all the problems that we're facing, and I think I think we think about that a lot, right? We could just work in a silo and do good work, but we know that to make the public's investment in DEC more valuable and more efficient, we have to use our effort. Expand our effort beyond our own borders. We just know that that's the case. That's why I went to the ECOS, the Environmental Council of the States meeting in Colorado. That's why we go to the climate summits globally, talk about New York. And we are a sliver of emissions. We're a sliver of the population. But I think we have a pretty big bully pulpit to talk about. Maybe I wouldn't call it a bully pulpit. It's a pulpit.
It's a pulpit.
It's just
Good
a
one.
pulpit. Let's
Yeah.
be nice. Let's lead by example, but we can talk about it as well and recognize, as I said in the beginning, we're the ninth largest economy in the world. So what we do here really truly matters. Climate Week next week. Everyone's coming to New York. I'm getting ready for speeches every day, meetings every day. We have lots of cool announcements coming out next week. They're all coming to the UN.
Follow them on Twitter. Get all the
On
updates.
Twitter.
That's how I stay in the loop.
On X,
Whatever it's called.
Exeter.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, just be a part of it, right? Be a part of what's going on in New York, and I think talking about it, I think helps. But there are a lot of other states doing great work right now too. We're really at an amazing inflection moment in history. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. And on that, I think we're on schedule now. And I just want to say again, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you so much for just giving the signal to your team that this is important and that, yes, go to ESF, set up in the quad, spend a day there. That's what I want you to be doing because it's such a great resource for our campus community, and it sends such a strong message to all of our students as they're going to walk around the campus today and be like, wow, this place really is deeply connected to what we do here.
Yeah.
And we will keep track of where they end up. We'll follow their internship journeys. We'll follow their career journeys, and we'll give you that data so you know and we'll just keep building. We'll always just keep building. This is such a special place, whether they go in the environmental community or they go into private practice or they go to work at DEC. They're going to know that connection with DEC is there and see you as a strong ally. So thank you for your time today as you're getting ready for your speeches next week to make the journey out here and spend some time with us. And thank you all for being here, and enjoy your day. Make sure you hit the quad and see our great setup out there. We're good?
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
And cut.
Thanks. Thanks, great. Thank you.
Good?
It was excellent.